This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. I'm very excited to say a guest I had on last month who had a wonderful reaction from all of you newer to the UFO topic is back joining me today for a follow-up. Some things have changed in that time. I have the Associate Professor of Teaching Philosophy at Ohio State University, an alleged CIA mole. I've got Dr. Steven Brown joining me on the podcast. Steven, welcome back.
Yeah, I'm playing this like really elaborate like 7D chess thing
Yeah.
where I'm like, aliens are real. We should take them very seriously. We should get transparency from the government, and somehow that makes me a mole. I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. Whatever. Like it's that's actually one of the things I want to talk to you about. We've talked a little bit ahead of time. One of the things I want to talk about is kind of the state of the UFO community. And how it's difficult for us to make progress because we're so divided against ourselves. But I don't need. I think I started blathering from the beginning last time, but I at least want to let you talk a little bit this time.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I think last time you went on a good hour and 45-minute rant, and then I said hi.
That seems about accurate. Yeah.
But listen, no, a few things, because this is very much a follow-up episode. If anyone's picking this up now, though, and hasn't heard that previous one, I suggest you definitely go back and listen to it. But for the benefit of those folks, Stephen, your presentation I had watched from a few months ago was titled Thinking Critically and Open-Mindedly About the Nazca Mummies. And yourself and myself, we spoke about your work and research on those mummies that have been found and presented by various folks, including Jaime Mussain and co. And you were looking at these, and correct me if I'm wrong, with a skeptical eye, but with a view of there's something here worth looking at, and potentially these bodies, or some of them, could at least be truly alien species, whatever alien may mean, non-human. Is that right?
Yeah, good. So one of the things that we should get clear about is this is just me again being an annoying philosopher. Like, what does the term skeptical mean? What does the term critical mean in these contexts, right? Because sometimes people, especially people who embrace the term skeptic, they equate this with a certain kind of materialist view of the world, right? Like everything's made up of protons, neutrons, electrons, and we can explain everything in terms of these kind of deterministic or semi-deterministic laws of physics, and that's kind of the worldview, right? And one of the reasons I like philosophy, I have a background in philosophy of religion, is calling some of the assumptions of that worldview into question, right? It's not obvious that the world is made up only of protons, neutrons, and electrons. There are remaining puzzles about consciousness, for instance, that are very real in the world of neuroscience and philosophy of mind. And right, like you have very, very sharp people like David Chalmers is one of my philosophical heroes, who are proposing ideas like panpsychism, like perhaps everything is conscious at some level, and then the reason you get complex minds like ours is by configuring the basic constituents of the world in the right kind of way, and then you get a complicated mind like ours. Anyways, like. So I'm very comfortable embracing the term skeptic, or in trying to be critically minded, as long as we don't equate that with this kind of reductive, naturalistic kind of worldview, right? Because so all of this to say, yes, like one of the things I've been calling into question as I've moved into this weird UFO alien world. One of the things I've been calling into question is this assumption that just basically everybody has, that any explanation involving aliens is off the table, right? And so one of the things I do at the beginning of that, critically open-minded about the Nazca mummies video, is I point at there are interesting arguments for the possibility of aliens as an available explanation of some of the things that we're seeing, right? Like we've already got the Fermi paradox, we've got the Drake equations, right? Like we've got this kind of preliminary data indicating that there are enough stars, there's been enough there's enough planets, there's been enough time for there to be the development of fully technologized civilizations that have plenty of time to get to our planet from wherever they came from, as long as they're within our galaxy. Without even assuming the possibility of faster than light travel. And then if you assume the possibility of faster than light travel, then just even more options are on the table, right? And so, yeah, like sometimes people who call themselves skeptics kind of seem to think that part of being a skeptic is ruling out hypotheses like that. Whereas I want to be skeptical about that part of their skepticism, right?
Sure.
Like it seems like we can't rule those things out, but they do need to be on the table. And yeah, as I looked at the Nazca mummies, from what I knew at the time, when I made that video, which was last September, I think was when I made that. October was when I originally made that video. I believe that the best explanation on the table was that the bodies of what I called now the J types and the M types, the ones that look like Josefina, which were like the ones that presented in the Mexico hearing, and the ones that look like Maria, which is the larger bodies with the elongated heads and tridactyl hands and feet, that the best explanation of those was aliens. Now, my view has changed based on data, right? Some of the data has been floating around for a while. This llama skull hypothesis has been floating around for a while, right? Everyone's known that there are some really striking similarities between parts of a llama skull and the skulls of the J-types. But there had been responses to those from certain researchers who had looked at these, like, no, there are some dissimilarities between those skulls and these skulls. And, so one of the things I've been trying to do since that video came out, right? It's one of the things I've been trying to do is talk to the researchers, get the data, put the data in front of other experts, and try to get their feedback. So yeah, even as recently as the last time I was speaking to you, I still thought that the leading hypothesis was alien body, coherent alien body. But yeah, I hope to have, and I think I've always done this, right? Say, kind of, here are the options, right? Like it's either a modern hoax, or it's it's an alien, or it's some kind of an ancient, like a ritual doll or something, right? And I've mostly been kind of throwing that option away, right? Like not taking it very seriously, as most of the people in the space have. And I just released another video based on it's just a recording of a lecture that I gave at the Roswell UFO Festival a couple of weeks ago, last weekend, I think it was, and not this past weekend, but the weekend prior. And in there, I make rather a lot of noise about this false dichotomy, right? That basically everyone, including me, has been approaching this as either it's a modern hoax or it's an alien, right? And there's been this other option on the table for a while, like, or it's an ancient ritual doll, right? A ritual doll is just kind of this term that people have been using. It's not clear to me what they are, and we should talk about what I think they might be and why we think that. But this is like, and again, I just want to emphasize to everybody, my previous video was kind of a playful, silly kind of hang out with my students and chat about the arguments and entertain them with the possibility that there might be aliens in Peru, right? What I'm trying to do now is something much more data-driven, much more science-driven. And again, people like to point out that I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. But the people who I am working with are really real scientists. like professional, very skilled, highly educated people who are working in state-of-the-art labs, top of their field. Like these are real people. And I know there's a problem right now, which is that they have requested, for reasons which we need to discuss, that their names not be made public. Right. And that does create a problem. And it's a problem all across ufology. Right. Like the people who know the things, the people who know the data are often not willing to go public in because there are real world consequences of being a person who is seen as taking these issues seriously at all. Right.
Tell me about it. Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Right. So
Yep.
that's one of the, yeah. Anyways. So I don't know. I'm blathering again, but yes.
No, that's fine.
So I have these kind of, now there's 2 videos up about on my channel about the Nazca mummies. One of them is the older one where I'm trying to defend that they're aliens, and then there's the new one, which is now embedded. You know, I'm kind of deeply embedded with all the data and all of the people and all of the science and all that, suggesting that the better way to think about them is as ancient archaeological objects. So I distinguish between several different types. The 2 most important ones are the M types, the ones that the big ones. That are human sized and very, very human similar, and then the J types. And I believe now that the J types, here, let me show you my little friends here, right? I have my 3D model of Josefina, right? Here's Josefina, right? I believe that Josefina and the ones that look like her are assembled out of multiple, the body parts of multiple species. That's what these
and
things
just
are.
Stephen, just for those on the audio platforms, the smaller ones look more like mini ETs but skinny.
Yes.
So like those are the small ones that you saw on camera a lot at the hearings and stuff.
Mini ETs but skinny, and what? This is like maybe 2 feet tall, something like that, or I don't know, centimeters.
About 1.5 feet, something like that. Yeah, 2 feet. Yeah, we'll go for that.
Something like that. I'm not. I would want to measure. Anyways, I think those are constructed. And you know, unfortunately, one of the ambiguities of the video that I just released is people are interpreting me as saying that the M types, the big ones, are constructed, and I do not believe those are constructed. Right, like those are fully coherent bodies with odd features in the skull, hands, and feet. Right, and it's an open question what explains the odd features of the skull, hand, and feet, but they have not been assembled from scratch. Right? Like they're like these things. Seem to have been, although more to talk about here. But yeah, does that make sense? So I just want to clarify that as much as I can here. I definitely do not believe that the M types are constructs. They might be modified in some way, either ancient or modern. Personally, I don't know what they are. If I had to bet, I would say ancient modification of some kind, but I don't know yet. Right?
Is that something like, and again to a layman, you hear about skull elongation in some cultures, something like that?
Right. Okay. So let's take modern hoax off the table for the time being. Right?
Sure.
We can come back to modern hoax, and let's talk about M types. Right. So the big ones. They have elongated skulls, and apparently the volume of those skulls is a little larger than you would expect it to be for a normal human skull, and maybe for an elongated skull. One of the things that we need better information on is what exactly skull binding does to the volume of the skull, right? Because there's a kind of preliminary argument that if you take a skull and squish it, then you've changed its shape, but not its volume, right? But if you look just at photographs of elongated skulls, some of them are very long, right? Like some of them seem to have a larger volume and not just a change in shape. So more data required on studying these skulls that we know are bound. And one of the reasons we know they're bound, apparently, so this is coming from Dr. Hernandez at the University of Ica, which is, they're right next to this area where these Paracas skulls were found in Peru. So they've been studying these things for a long time. And I'm just kind of taking his word for this for the time being, right? Like apparently on the bound skulls, there are signs of binding. So there are kind of like marks in the bone from the binding, and apparently there are some differences in the way that the suture lines in the skulls look from ordinary skulls, because if you squeeze them, then the sutures show up differently. That's what he says, and more data required, right? But let's just set aside some of that complexity for the time being. We know you can make an elongated skull by binding it, right? So does that explain the M-type skulls? hard to say, more research required, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some people are saying yes, they could be entirely be explained by skull binding, maybe a different kind of skull binding than the Paracas used, some kind of better form of skull binding, or maybe it can't be explained by skull binding. So open question there, right? But there's at least a hypothesis on the table where you could elongate a skull, like we know you can elongate skulls by skull binding, right?
Yep.
So so that's one available explanation, is skull binding for the skulls. There's other things that are different about the skulls. There are no external ears. You could cut off the ears, right? Either when that person was alive or after that person died. You can't do skull binding after they died, right? That means that, like, if that skull is long and it's because of skull binding, then that had to happen from infancy, like from the moment they were born or shortly thereafter. You would have to bind that skull because you want to prevent the soft spot from fusing, right? That's how you get the elongated skulls. So if there's no way that the elongated skulls of the M types can be explained by anything modern or post-mortem. That had to be done in the childhood of the source organism for whatever that thing is, right? So either, physical manipulation or genetic manipulation or something like that. Hybridization of some kind, right? Like cross-species chimeras, or like whatever your explanation is going to be. That has to be during the lifetime of the M types, right? Like from the very beginning of them, from infancy. So it's still an open question about the hands and the feet, right? So structurally, if you just look at the bones that are in there, most of them are compatible with the hypothesis that you cut off the pinky and the thumb and you slit down in between these two fingers, right? Most of them have 1, 2, 3, 4 phalanges. If this becomes a phalange, right, by slicing this thing, that explains most of them. Now, there's at least one of them, Maria, which has an additional bone on the end. So in addition to slicing, you would have to presumably cut off the tip of this, cut off the last 2 bones of a different being, and attach it somehow. Again, either during the lifetime or post-mortem, right? Now that, in principle, that modification, if it's a physical modification, that in principle could be done now, right? Like you could take a mummy, you could take 2 mummies, and you could cut the last one, and you could cut the last 2, and you could glue it on and wrap it and cover the seams somehow. That in principle could be done now. And I just people are mad at me, right? Because of trying to speak clearly about what the possibilities here. That is a possibility. Right? Just based on the number of bones and the shape of the bones and things like that. Do we know that's what happened? No. Right? Like it's possible, just given the bone structure, that's a modern modification. It's possible that it's an ancient modification. It's possible that it's a genetic modification. All those options are currently on the table, right? But you can't do modern modification of skulls. So the skulls must be ancient somehow, right? Like when the thing grew.
Yeah. Is it fair to say still, even in some of these options you're discussing, and I'm not trying to steer the conversation, even though that's my job, that some of those options are still exotic in nature? Genetic modification from 1,000 years or 2,000 years ago, whatever, isn't something that was going on. So something had to be helping. So not saying that is what happened, but in these options, it's not just that people done this and this was the result.
Right. So it's important for us to at least consider the less exotic and the more exotic explanation, right?
Yeah.
So let's take modern hoax off the table for the time being. Let's just consider the ancient hypotheses, right? So you have, less to more exotic explanations. The least exotic explanation is bind the skulls and slit the hands, either while they're still alive or after they die, right? Those are, like, we know they could do those things because it's, we have ample record of skull binding, and, cutting a hand is not that hard. Now, if you cut the hand while they were alive, that it would make the hand not work. Like, you couldn't use the hands anymore. If you slit this and you cut off the thumb and pinky, like, that person would not be able to use their hands. But they would look really cool. Right. So you can imagine people waiting on them, right? And like always like feeding them and like just taking care of all their needs, right? That's what you'd have to do if it were done during their lifetime. So that would be, we'll just say, like a body mod, right? Like a real world body mod. We know they're doing body mods because we have the elongated skulls, right? Bound skulls. So this could be a lifetime body mod, or it could be some kind of a burial ritual. Like after they died, they modified the hands because it was important for the mummies to look like this, right? The mummification process, or the not mummification, but the preparation process. Well, we'll just say mummification, right? The preparation and drying out of the bodies was you could do the modification then. So those are two ancient hypotheses. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then you have the exotic ones like genetic engineering or hybridization with something else. And look, me personally, right now, I'm inclined to go with the less exotic hypothesis here.
Sure.
Right? Like I don't see yet any conclusive reason why we should be pushing for the more exotic hypothesis, right? That like the less exotic hypothesis seems sufficient. An advanced form of skull binding and surgical modification either during or after the lifetime seems sufficient to explain the data. Now, people disagree with me on that. We need more data. I really don't know. There are puzzles in the air, like more data, right? But my personal hunch is that the less exotic hypothesis is going to be sufficient. Now, look, I would love it to turn out that we go and we do DNA and we really examine the hands and it turns out that there's genetic modifications. Like that would be really cool. But we do not yet have data sufficient to establish that.
Okay. So that's the big ones.
Yeah.
The little ones you believe were constructed.
Yeah.
Little thin ETs have, that's the ones. Have we got a hypothesis for a why these were constructed, when they were constructed?
Can we talk about how first?
Go for it. Yep. How?
Let's talk about how, because the why is presumably the same for this and the big ones, right? Under the ancient hypothesis. So let's do the how real quick on these, right? Because this is a lot more work than, I don't know, skull binding takes a whole lifetime.
And the one you're holding, Stephen, is also a replica and not one of the actual specimens.
This is a 3D print, yes.
Just to point that out to people.
Yeah, I do not. I'm not handling one of what I take to be a potentially a priceless archaeological artifact. I am not waving this around in front of me.
To be fair, some of the folks in charge of those priceless artifacts previously didn't handle them too well and snapped a finger off. So
there is damage that has been done to multiple of the bodies. That is correct. And one of the reasons why I'm very serious now about talking about this ancient construction hypothesis, because a number of the objects that have been associated with this have been completely ignored as worthless, where we really need to take the possibility of ancient construction seriously, because if ancient construction is on the table, then some of these things which have been considered worthless and obviously hoaxes might not be worthless and obviously hoaxes. They might be other forms of biological, artistic, religious, whatever they are, right?
Sure.
And that's why it's really important to me that this other option is on the table, that we really need to be taking seriously both the possibility that these are actually aliens or, exotically modified humans or something like that, and that they might be archaeological objects, because, it will entail treating some of them differently. Right. Okay. So, this thing is a 3D print of Josefina, which is the kind of first one that was revealed and the most data had been available on. There's better scans on some of the later ones now. But as I talk about in the video, and as many people have suspected, the skull of this seems to be a modified llama skull. We can see in the CT scans a thin spot right between her eyes, which is exactly as predicted. You'd have to grind this down on a llama skull, and if you look at the CT scans, you can see the grind. You can see the result of the grinding, which is the thinned area of the bone here, and you can actually see on some of the CT scans, you can see the kind of porous bone underneath, which seems to indicate that the smooth bone on top of it has been ground away. Now we can't directly observe this because it's covered with the apparent skin, right? So yeah, and then there's these patterns on the back of the skull, which seem to be the kind of fins that are left over if you cut off the back of the face of the llama skull. I have a llama skull right here. This is not a real llama skull. This is also a 3D print of a llama skull, right? But the idea is, right, here's these guys, right? The back part of the llama skull looks sort of like a face. And if you cut off enough parts of it, and you only have to add a couple of things. There will be two holes in the back of the skull if you cut this off here. So there are two panels that are here that you can see from the inside, are glued on, and not with any modern glue, but with like an ancient, at least compatible with ancient substance, and
something adhesive, basically. Yeah.
Yep. Which you can create adhesives by boiling skin, right, and then or bones. You can, and then you would have to add a couple of bone panels here to create this mouth shape. But that's the only modification, the only additional modification, like adding things, right? You have to subtract a bunch of stuff, cut a bunch of stuff off, grind a bunch of stuff, and then you have to add two panels on the back and two pieces for the mouth, right? That's what you have to do to make this thing. And look, I think at this point, this argument is conclusive. People are upset that I think it's conclusive, but I do think it's conclusive, right? There have been several alleged differences between this skull and this one that have turned out, upon further analysis, not to be differences. I have been talking to the scientists who have been making the claims about the differences between the skull. Some of them are coming around to agreeing that they are modified llama skulls, and some of them are not, right? So this is still in dispute, but I personally am comfortable with the conclusion, and my team is comfortable with the conclusion. Everybody on my team who used to believe that these were aliens now believes that that this is a modified llama skull. And we've all done that based on analysis of the data, the CT scan data. And there's also this additional data from proteomics, which is the study of proteins, which indicates that there are, in fact, llama proteins in the skull. Now, we're running into this problem right now, which is that some people are accusing us of studying some of the fakes, right? And there's a real problem here, right? Which is there's not a canonical set of samples, right? That's like, these are the real ones, right? So Josefina is presumably one of the real ones, right? And no one has cut apart Josefina for obvious reasons. No one should cut apart Josefina for obvious reasons. If Josefina is a archaeological object or an alien, we shouldn't cut her up, right? We should study her non-destructively, right? Now, there are a bunch of loose skulls that look exactly like this and come from exactly the same source, right? That were obtained at the same time as Josefina, under all the same conditions as Josefina. So, like, they're not coming from somewhere else. They're coming from the same source. They're coming from the same batches, right? Like when people obtained Josefina and Artemis and Paul and Luisa and all of the ones that everyone's taking seriously, there were also loose skulls that were obtained at the same time. Hold them next to each other, they look exactly the same source, right? One of those loose skulls, not this one, because this is a different one, right? But there are a bunch of loose skulls, right? That are not just skulls; they also have the skin and stuff on them, right? And they also, from the same source, all the same features. They are, they have been presumed by all of the people who believe that they are aliens to be of the same type, right? And and one of them has been opened. This is not it, but this is a 3D print this is just this one 3D printed, but with it separated so we can look at the inside. So this is not a 3D print of the one that has been opened, right? Just to be clear, right? But the one that has been cut open came from the same source, same batch of purchases / whatever. I mean, they've been purchased, right? But for research purposes. And one of them has been cut open, right? So and that's where the samples came from, is inside of that one. Now, right, you'll look around and some people are saying, well, look, this object that Steve has pictures of, if you look at the inside of that and then you look at the inside of this fake one, they look exactly the same. That's consistent with the hypothesis that I'm proposing, or that my team is proposing, right? Which is that all of them are llama skulls. If they're all llama skulls, then when you cut one open, they'll all look like llama skulls on the inside. What the alternative hypothesis would need to do would be to show that there are any of the skulls which are different in some substantial way, right? And no one has done that, and in my view, no one can do that, because I've seen the best data that we have, the best scans we have on all of the bodies. Well, that's not true. I haven't seen all the bodies, right? I've seen the best scans that we have on 6 of the J-type bodies, and they are all consistent structurally. They all have the spot between the eyes where the grinding would happen. They all have the spots in the back, the thin spots in the back where the panels would have to be added. They all have the jagged marks on the back, which would be the leftovers from the llama skull cuts. So one of the reasons I changed my mind is because in the original argument that I articulated in my first video, there's a claim made that there are no signs of grinding or cutting. Mm-hmm. And there are signs of grinding and cutting. That is not correct, right? There are signs of grinding and cutting. If you look at the CT on all of them, you can see where, between the eyes where the grinding has been done, where the thinning has been done. And in the highest resolution scans, you can see the porous bone right underneath here, right? That seems to be exposed. That is sign of grinding. Right, the little fin parts on the back of this that are causing this jagged shape on the back, that is sign of cutting. That there was the rest of the skull and it was cut off, which is why those little jagged bits are still there, right? So there are signs of manipulation. They are not exposed to the air. You can't look at them directly because they're covered with this skin of some kind, right? But does that make sense? So yeah. And again, I want to articulate, people are going to say, Steve, who are you? You're a philosophy professor. You don't know how to read CT scans. I know. I'm sitting down with X-ray techs and professional surgeons who are going over the scans with me. And we're looking, they were the ones who showed me some of these features, right? All I did was create the animation, right? But the analysis is being done by medical professionals, and not just medical professionals, paleontologists and other folks that have relevant skills, veterinarians and anthropologists. And does that make sense?
Yeah. Can you speak this on something for me? Is part of the problem not exactly what you've experienced firsthand, that the science being done is so fragmented still that some people are seeing some of this stuff, other people have some of the other stuff, other people have the originals but won't let X, Y, or Z be done to them, and everything seems to be all over the place in terms of this still. So anything that is being done, either way, you can conclude on one set that you have something that definitely resembles a llama skull. There's cutting, there's grinding. We've got enough proof here to say the evidence shows these are ancient reconstructions for whatever reason, but of llama skulls and bits and pieces. However, another totally separate group, but again, authentic group of scientists and academics could have another set of materials and conclude something different. So then you've got 2 sets of scientists presenting to the public. We believe these are genuinely exotic, non-human, whatever, and another set saying we believe these aren't, but they're actually, You've got
Different objects.
someone's made a wonderful cake, and off the back of that, they've made a few different batches of other cakes that look like the same cake, but they're telling you they're all the same stuff, but you're never actually getting to check the original cake.
Well, so there is no original cake, right? In this case, right? There are a bunch of separate cakes, but fair enough, right? And this is happening to me right now. I say I'm analyzing Josefina and Alberto and Artemis and Luisa and Paul and another loose skull that was scanned at the same time as Artemis. I'm analyzing those using CT, and we have this additional skull, which has been cut open, which is being analyzed directly, samples taken out of that, right?
Yeah.
And then, we use the similarity in the structure to suggest that all of them are the same, right? That's the structure of the argument that I'm using, right? There are other bodies out there, and people are examining those other bodies. That creates problems, right?
Yeah.
Because one team might be looking at one body and another team might be looking at another body. So it's open to people who are concerned about this to say, well, they're not looking at the same objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually said the same thing in my first video about the beings that were being studied by Flavio Estrada Morena. Now in that case, the one that he was calling the most attention to is clearly different than these ones, right?
Yeah.
Just obviously different than this in every way. It's not like this thing at all, except the just same general shape, right? But like the bone structure is entirely different. Like there's, you understand what I'm saying, right? So yeah, there's a real problem here. And what we're trying, so here's what we're trying to do right now. What we're trying to do right now is work with the Latin American scientists to get a kind of to get a plan in place, right? So I'm talking especially closely to Jose Rios Lopez. I haven't yet talked to Zalsa Benitez, but Rios Lopez has talked to Zalsa Benitez on my behalf, and we're trying to network them. We're trying to talk to Dr. Zuniga and Dr. Hernandez and the others at the university in Ica, right? So the plan is to work with all of those parties at least, and hopefully with other parties that have bodies or specimens or whatever. Like, we want this to be as big tent as we can get it, right? Like, we want to get past all the fighting and past all the factions, and build. I think the best way to do this is to build it around the University of Ica. And try to get some kind of registry about how many bodies we have and what studies have been done on them and what samples have been taken and who's analyzed those. And we want to do that in a way that protects the privacy of the people who want to be kept private. And here's how we propose to do that, right? And we're working on this right now. What we're trying to do is get somebody at the University of Ica to be responsible for credentials vetting, right? And create the appropriate contracts, legal contracts between researchers and hopefully the university. The idea is to have some kind of a clearinghouse, and to use, hypothetically, we'll just say for now it is the university. That's my hope. I would like it to be the University of Ica, right? There's somebody at the University of Ica. They get the profiles of the researchers, right? Here's Anonymous Dave, and where that person works and what that person's education is and all that kind of stuff, what their publications are. They have a full CV of that person. Mm-hmm. Then they say, this person looks cool. This is a qualified researcher. And then there's a public version of their profile that's thin and anonymized, right? Researcher number 027, right? And researcher number 027 has a PhD in this, mm-hmm. from not a specific institution, but from an institution accredited by this accreditation body, right? That's an ambiguous enough thing that you couldn't track down who that person is. And they are working in this country, in this field, right? Something like that. Like an anonymized thing that lets people know what kind of a person is this, what kind of expertise do they have, right? Mm-hmm. But the University of Ica people, they know who they actually are and what their publication record is and all that kind of stuff, right? And that, I think, would provide a nice mechanism for us to have, some public transparency and some real checks and balances to make sure that the bodies are being handled responsibly by responsible people. The samples are being handled responsibly by responsible people. There's also just a ton of legal issues involved right now, right?
Yeah.
Like taking samples from bodies across borders to get them analyzed is a legally treacherous thing to do, right? So we want to make sure as best we can that all of that is done above board, and that, like nothing is being smuggled, and we're not working with smuggled sources or anything like that, right? Like, so all of that is going to take some work, because a lot of crazy stuff has happened here, right? So that's the proposal, right? The proposal is work with the Latin American scientists who have already been analyzing these things for many years, right? Like, a lot of people are mad at me. Who are you? You're this newcomer from America, and like, why are you ignoring what the people in these Latin American scientists have been studying them for 7 years have been saying? I'm not ignoring them. I'm working with them, right? We're trying to get some process in place for a responsible and transparent process that does still protect the privacy of the people who need their privacy protected.
That makes sense. So the Jaime Mussain, who has been a big part of this, and I've deliberately left it out so far. You've not mentioned him once yet in your conversation. You've named some of the scientists involved. And the folks you've not named, he's not one of them you've hinted at. Why has Jaime Mussain been left out of what you've said? And two, why doesn't he like you?
Okay, there's an obvious reason why Jaime is being left out of this. And it's funny, Jaime went on a rant about me on this past Sunday, right? On his show. There's a certain irony in the degree to which he's yelling about the fact that I'm not a scientist, right? Because of course Jaime is not a scientist either, right? Jaime is a journalist, right? So Jaime is irrelevant, right? No. At the end of the day, Jaime's view, one way or the other, is like my view, only interesting in as much as it's informed by credentialed scientists, right? There's a version of this where Jaime isn't involved at all. There's no particular reason for Jaime to be involved. Where just the scientists look at the samples, and we do this kind of process where there's some kind of researcher registry, an anonymized version made available to the public. And we go responsibly through this data, following all the laws, and Jaime's not involved. Now, I'm not saying Jaime can't be involved. Maybe Jaime's involved in some way or another, and I'm very grateful that Jaime's brought attention to these things and made sure that they are taken seriously. I think that's correct. So that's why I haven't spoken about him before, right? There's no need for him to be involved in the process I just described.
Yeah,
he can be if he would like to be, if it makes sense for him to be involved. Like he does have access to some of these bodies, and if those bodies are going to be responsibly studied, then maybe we should all work together to come up with a plan to make sure that all the bodies are registered, who studied the bodies and what's been done to each body. Like, there's some kind of exhaustive database about that, ideally, in my view, at the University of Ica. I think that's the best place to do it. Why is he mad at me? He's mad at me because I have been converted to the llama skull argument, to the llama skull hypothesis. And he thinks the llama skull hypothesis is absurd. That's why he's mad, right? I mean, fair enough, right? Like, some of the things he said on that show are not factually accurate, right? There's some translation problems going on here, right?
Yeah.
Like English and Spanish translation problems. What I said is there is evidence that the bones that join the bones in the toes, for instance, and the bones in the knees have been joined by putting what I said is a natural fiber put into the hollow bones and then a glue wrapped around, a natural glue. I believe in the podcast that he recorded this past week that he said that I was suggesting that they had wires in them. I definitely don't think there are wires in them. If there are wires in them, they would show up white hot in all of the x-rays, right? Like that's not what I said. I said fibers, not wires, right? I believe he suggested that I was saying that they were modern constructs. I am definitely not saying they are modern constructs, right? I am saying they are not. I am saying that these, the J types, the ones that look like Josefina, the short ones, are ancient constructs. I am not saying that the big ones, M types, are constructs at all. I am saying they are modified humans. Where I'm leaving modification open to all hypotheses, the exotic hybridization, genetic engineering hypotheses, all the way down to the more mundane, physically slicing the hands and binding the skulls, right? Like
because we don't know either way.
Because we don't know either way. We need better data on the skin and the muscles and the tendons and the DNA. Like there's a lot of work left to do to establish what's going on with the M types. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't want Jaime to be mad at me. I think we can all agree. That these are objects that are fascinating, that are important, that need to be studied. I think we can all agree on what the studies that need to be done, right? I think we can all agree on methodology and like a registry of people who are studying them. I think we can all agree about the value of anonymity for the researchers who do not want to be publicly known as involved in something this contentious, right? And I think we can solve all of those problems if we are patient and kind and listen to each other and not yell at each other. Then I think we can get all of that done, and everybody at the end of the day will be happy. That's my goal, and I know that sometimes making everybody happy is impossible, but I really do think that if we have this other option on the table, nobody needs to be afraid, right? Like we can, if they're aliens, then trying to demonstrate that they are not aliens will prove that they are aliens, right? Like that's the way this works. This is literally what happened to me. I was trying to prove that these are not llama skulls. Like I gave it as much of a run for its money as I possibly could, right? And in trying to prove that these are not llama skulls, I proved to my own satisfaction that they are llama skulls. This is true for everybody else on my team, right? Surgeons, archaeologists, x-ray techs. We all came in thinking these were alien skulls. And then we dug into it deeper and found that they were llama skulls. So.
Okay. So I think it's fair to say you've put across very well why you've gone from where you were to where you are now. Yeah. What I'd like you to kind of touch on is, for you, what are the enduring mysteries then still with these bodies? And maybe even, I'll just say it really bluntly, for anyone listening to this now disappointed that, Steven Brown's ruined it a little bit for me. This guy came in totally new to the subject. We sounded like we had a friend, which I'm not saying you're not.
Yeah.
He's kind of dashed my hopes a little bit of the Ross and Rachel reunion here. It's not going to happen. Why do you think there's still cause for optimism that these, aside from, you've mentioned obviously one, is there is potential for genetic manipulation or hybridization, which would almost definitely be something exotic, shall we say?
Yep.
Is there anything else you think actually these are still quite mysterious?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a number of enduring mysteries, and let's say that let me classify them a little bit. One of the enduring mysteries is under the assumption that the J types are constructs. All I've said so far is that we know what the skull is made of, right? Mm-hmm. What are the legs made of? What are the arms made of? And most importantly of all, what is the torso made of? And I say that because it looks like, based on what we're seeing, the leading hypothesis for what the torso is made of is a human infant, right? And that's a big deal, right? Because if that's true, And we can study this directly, right? Like we can take samples, we can look at the bones in the CT, we can compare them to humans, right? We can imagine an appropriately sized human, right? Which is an infant. Like this is a little guy, right? If this is a human, if the torso is a human torso, then it's a very little one. It's like a newborn human, right? Presumably a stillborn human or a human that dies in infancy. Like we don't need to imagine like infant sacrifice or anything like that, right? Like it could. There a lot of infants die, right? In the ancient world, a lot of infants die. So this might turn out not to be a ritual doll at all. It might literally be an actual mummy, including removal of organs, right? This could end up being an extremely elaborate mummification technique for infants, right? In which they added the bones, the skull of a llama, presumably because they valued elongated skulls, and there wasn't time to develop the elongated skull of the infant because it didn't have chance to elongate. So you could replace that, right? And then the structure and form of this, which is now very puzzling. Why did they do this, right? Why did they add reptile skin? Right. So that's a really deep mystery. Under the kind of less exotic hypotheses, right? Like what's this made of? If it's human, that's amazing. And we need to understand it. Hoax hypothesis. If it's human, right, then that means someone is messing with either infant mummies, which I do not think is possible given the brittleness of the bones, or modern infants, right, which would be horrifying and obviously extremely illegal. So like we really, really, really need to get to the bottom of this case no matter what. Does this all make sense? Now, so one of the enduring mysteries from the kind of minimalist, least exotic hypotheses is what this thing is made of. Is it a human? If it's a human, we really need to know. If it's a monkey or a chinchilla or something like that, then very interesting, but not as interesting, right? Because we're not talking about human remains are more interesting than chinchilla remains, right? And need to be treated differently. So there's that question. Now, are there still aliens on the table? Yeah, there are still aliens on the table. There might still be things that indicate the presence of alien contact, non-human contact in this pre-Columbian Peruvian world, right? The most obvious would be we find some body or some skull or something that isn't from this planet. Is that still on the table? Yeah, there are these skulls that are very strange looking, and who knows? Like we haven't analyzed all of them. Like one of the things that is just so hard to explain to people who aren't close to this yet is there are a lot of objects, right? And one of them might turn out to be alien parts, right? Like that's still on the table. It's still on the table that the M types turn out to be genetically modified humans, or genetically related to humans, or something very similar to a human but genetically different from a human, right? That is still on the table. Claims have been made there that seem a little premature, as far as like we ran the DNA and some percentage of it is not identified, and therefore it's from someplace else. There are alternative explanations, right? Reading ancient DNA is extremely difficult to do. I do not know how to do this. I clearly do not know how to do this, right? We are working now with really high level genetics people, right? Like top of the line genetics people working on ancient DNA. That's what we want, right? We don't have anybody on the team yet that's top of the line and working on ancient DNA. One of the problems is like getting enough specificity, right?
Sure.
But we have access to those people. Like we're trying to get people looped in to getting that kind of information. So if these are genetic hybrids or if they're aliens, the M types, it will come out in the wash. We will demonstrate it as best we can, right? So nobody needs to be afraid that we're ignoring that hypothesis. That hypothesis is being tested along with all the other ones, right? Another mystery, which I didn't discuss in my video and should have, it was just an oversight because I hadn't had enough sleep because I was trying to get things done, is the metals, right? So there are these metallic plates that are implanted in the skin of not all of them. There are specimens of all types that have metal implants, right? There are also specimens of all types that do not have metal implants. The metal implants are in different places. They are in different shapes. There are some similarities between some of the specimens. The metal plates are all over the place as far as shape and position and across the different types, right? So what do we make of those metal plates? Claims have been made about the metallurgy, right? That there are metals in those plates that shouldn't be there, given the degree of metallurgy available to the Nazca people or the Paracas people at the time. This is a testable hypothesis. It needs to be tested, right? There is some preliminary claims that have been made about osmium, which is an extremely weird and exotic metal that's very difficult to extract. And if there's any significant amount of osmium in the metal plates, that itself is indication of something very strange going on in Peru. Even if, right, like, so let's assume Josefina is a llama skull glued to a chinchilla body, glued to various bones from monkeys and llamas. Let's say, and with some reptile skin glued onto her. Let's say that's what she is, right? Well, if this plate has osmium in it, then that's still evidence of some kind of very unusual, potentially non-human contact in ancient Peru, right? So that's still on the table. And then there's the big thing, which is staring us all in the face, right? Which is, if this is an ancient construct, why would they make these things? Right? And one of the interesting things about this is we have artwork. Oh, I don't have the book here; it's at my house. But we have artwork from approximately the same time period, approximately the same space, paintings of beings that look kind of like this: long torso, long head, big eyes, tridactyl hands and feet, right? Like, we have paintings of those. And there's an open question in interpreting those paintings, right? How intentional is it that it looked like that? Did they just try to draw something that looked human, but they stylized it because stylization is cool, and that's the way they stylized a human, right? That's an open question about these paintings. If this thing turns out to be an ancient construct, no, they weren't just trying to make something that looked human, stylized. No. They were modifying bodies, maybe human bodies, right? If this turns out to be a human body, then the idea that this artistic thing is just the way they expressed human bodies goes out the window, right? Because if they modified human bodies to look like something else, which we know they did with the M types, right? Minimally under the assumption that the M types have been physically modified in the past, right? Then we know that they were modified with the intent of creating long skulls and tridactyl hands, right? We know that these were made with the intent, the J types, with the intent of giving long skulls, big eyes, tridactyl hands and feet, and reptile skin, because those have all been very intentionally built into what this object is, right? So now you really have to ask, why are the Nazca people body modding themselves with the M types to look like tridactyl, elongated skull, large-eyed reptilian things? Why are they building the J types potentially out of their infants to give them long skulls, big eyes, tridactyl hands and feet, and reptile skin, right? Like, boy, that's a real mystery, right? And, I think personally that is every bit as interesting a mystery as why are these things, well, I don't know, approximately as interesting a finding as these are actual bodies of aliens or actual genetically hybrids, right? So what I want to say here is the more exotic hypotheses are obviously fascinating in kind of pointing at, like, if we have an alien body, that's alien related, right? If we have a hybrid body that's hybrid alien and human, that's alien related. But even the less exotic hypotheses are alien related, where we use alien very broadly, right? Like alien just means other. Like they're clearly trying to, under the less exotic versions, they are clearly trying to modify their own bodies and the bodies of whatever these J types are made out of to look like things that are very similar to what we now think of as aliens. And that is a really big and important question that needs to be on the table. And yeah, does that make sense?
Absolutely. So, couple of questions off the back of that.
Yeah.
Let's go with the hoax one first.
Yeah.
If these are hoaxed, and again, I appreciate you're not a scientist, but you're working with them and you know more about this than I do. Is someone not wasting a highly specialized talent by being able to trick so many scientists and confuse so many people en masse with all of this stuff? Or is it just actually something that's really simple to do?
Well, yeah, it's not simple to do. Yeah, they would be wasting. Yeah, it would take a lot of work and talent, and the reason we really need to get clear about why it would take so much work and talent to build these things. It's because of certain features that they have. The most obvious one is the radiocarbon dating, right? The radiocarbon dating that has been done on all of the samples that it's been done on has pointed old, very old, like 1,000 plus, 7 to 2,000 or more years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't fake that except by using really old materials.
Yeah.
So if it's a modern construct, then you needed to work with ancient parts, right? Using ancient parts is problematic for at least two reasons. That means you have to damage or destroy things which already have a lot of value.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a being like Maria or a being like Montserrat. These are the M types, the big ones, right? Montserrat's the one that is pregnant. Let's say you have mummies that you started with there. It's very clear that the heads are continuous with the bodies, right?
Yeah.
So that means that you had to start, if this is a modern modification to the hands and feet, you had to start with a very well preserved human mummy that's 1,000 years old ish, with an already elongated skull. And let's say it looked like the other elongated skull mummies that we have already, which there are other elongated skull mummies, right? Those other elongated skull mummies have ears. You're going to have to cut those off. They have 5 fingers. You're going to have to cut those off, right? With the M types. So that's going to be really, really hard to do without showing traces that our people, the people who've been looking at them for years and years and years, and the people who are just recently started looking at them aren't finding, right? So like really qualified people are looking at these external features, the lack of ears, the lack of fingers, and they are not seeing obvious signs of modern modification on at least some of them. Like, let's just say Maria and Montserrat in particular, right? Like those two are like really impressively done.
High grade specimens, yeah.
And it's just like we need to remember that the high grade, like let's go with Montserrat, right?
Yeah.
If you had this really elegantly preserved body from 700 to 1,000 years ago, with an elongated skull, and you made the decision to chop its ears and fingers off, that would be a financially stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Because that body itself has real, like, historical, archaeological value. So you'd be taking a real risk in doing that, right? Of destroying something that has value and trying to create something that has a weirder value, right? Passing it off as an alien. That's a strange thing to do. And if you talk about the J types, assuming all the parts of them test old, which is one of the things that we need to check, right? Because samples have only been taken from certain parts, and it's still possible that there's like some parts that are old and some parts that are new, but no one has found any parts yet that have tested new, right? So let's stick with the hypothesis that everything consistently tests old. Could you make this modern? No. Like the stuff you would have to do to whatever this torso is, in cutting off these ribs and binding this thing and bridging the ribs, and like doing that with a mummy is not feasible because these things are really brittle. They're fragile inside, right? Like this is why they've been broken by mishandling, right? So no, no. Modern hoax is the least plausible hypothesis here. Like it's not a good explanation of the actual data. If it's a construct, the better hypothesis, for now at least, seems to be old. Now, if we do more sampling and we get inside and we, do some DNA analysis or radiocarbon from other parts of the body, and it comes back, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, then okay, then that's a modern construct, right? But that's not happened. And so at least for now, we need to be taking seriously the possibility that these are ancient, either ancient actual bodies or ancient constructs. And the tests are all going to be the same. So this is my attempt to coalition build is nobody needs to be afraid of the science here, right? The science will distinguish between modern hoax, ancient construct, alien, or whatever other hypotheses we might have neglected, right? Like the science will distinguish between those. Nobody needs to be afraid. The truth does not need to be afraid, right?
Correct. However, people still do fear it. And I think it's very similar to if everyone loved a book. Let's take the first Harry Potter book. If everyone on the planet loved it unanimously, right? Yeah. And then they said, we're going to make a movie of this. Yeah. There is no movie version of that book they could make that everyone would love because you would interpret someone's character wrong. They wouldn't look like what they thought they looked like. That Diagon Alley looks different to what they imagined in their heads. And ultimately, you maybe tweak little bits of the story, but that's not what I thought would happen, or that's not how I thought that would play out. And that's the same with like this UFO topic, that no matter what happens, even in the cold light of day, that we finally find out the ultimate truth, whatever that might look like or be, there's going to be so many people, if not everyone, who was wrong, or that's not what they thought, and it's not their narrative, it's not their truth, not their story. So there's a lot of fear with this. And I think that brings me into the point that you're new to the UFO topic. Yeah. That's like, it's less than a year, your kind of baptism of fire at this point.
Slightly more than a year at this point.
Oh, slightly
a year and a month. Okay.
Year and
13 months.
You're finding very quickly that the UFO community, and when I say that, I mean people who like the UFO subject, who have access to the internet, okay? Because there's loads of nice folks who have an interest in UFOs. I hear from plenty of them, but between YouTube comments, social media comments, and I'm guessing emails, you've seen all sides of the UFO topic. Is that right?
At this point, yeah. I had kind of lived in this peaceful bubble where not a lot of people were mad at me until I changed my view here, right? Because basically I articulated a view, and so I kind of got friendly with everybody who had that view, and then I switched views, and so I've now seen the other side, right? If you want to see it, go to my most recent video and just go look at the YouTube comments, right? Like
I am on the comments right now.
there's a full-on flame war going on
Yeah.
in there, right? It's got 2183 views and 332 comments, right? I've stopped reading it, right? Like it's emotionally difficult, right? Like I am a human, right?
Yeah.
Like I am a human with real feelings, and like, yeah, yeah, we got to talk about this, right? Like the UFO community is toxic,
Yeah.
and the internet at large is toxic.
Yes, I was going to add that, but yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and for lots of reasons, right? Essentially arising from siloed information echo chambers, right? And echo chambers and anonymity.
Yes, that
right?
I was just about to say anonymity is a huge one. Yep.
Stick those two things together in a world where the political system is designed to polarize us, right? And we will polarize. Yeah, that's what's happening. And importantly, I really want to say this. The UFO community is polarized on purpose. It has been polarized on purpose, right? Like, for whatever reason, the US government in particular has made decisions to hide information from the public that is important in understanding whatever the UFO phenomenon is, right? And maybe to feed out false information, right? Like there is evidence, like Richard Doty, that there were intentional efforts to feed out false information with the intent of dividing the UFO community, right? Like there's evidence that that's happened. There's evidence in some of the declassified documents that that's happened, that there's been a strategy on the part of the government to divide us against ourselves, right? David Grush's testimony specifically says this, right? There is an active, decades-long disinformation campaign by the US government, which is morally wrong, is something that David Grush has said under oath, right? And behind closed doors in secure rooms with members of Congress and members of the intelligence community, and right, like, and the people walking out of those rooms go, "Yep, I can't tell you the details, but I believe David Grush. I believe that. I believe that there's something being covered up. There's things that are being hidden, and in ways that are not good." Right, that Congress is not able to oversee. And like what that has done, like if you, oh gosh, man, if you really think about this, it fries your mind, right? Like just for a moment, those of you who are still skeptical about this, just for a moment, take seriously the possibility that David Grush is telling the truth, right? That means that since the 1940s, at least, the US government has been either hiding from the public or actively deceiving the public into not paying attention to what's going on. Don't look at this. It's not interesting. Again, we have documents stating that this is the policy of the US government to try to get people to not pay attention to this. They've been doing that on purpose, right? If you take, some of the other testimonies seriously, they've been feeding disinformation on purpose to divide us for our whole lifetimes. Since the day we were born, and for me and you, a couple of decades before that, the global population has been intentionally divided against itself on this topic. So it's not surprising that we can't get along, right? That some of us think it's one thing and some of us think it's another thing. And we think that the other people are lying to us. And we think that the other people are moles that must be paid by the government to lie, because there is evidence that there are people who have been paid by the government to lie. And like, that fact is so damn toxic. Like, if David Grush is telling the truth, which I believe, and I have spoken to people who have access to information way more secure than anything I have access to, people that I trust, and they're like, he's telling the truth. He's telling the truth. And it's shocking. It's shocking. Like, I have the great privilege of teaching at the Ohio State University, and the class I teach every semester is Asian philosophies. I have the great privilege of teaching students from all over the world, right? About Asian philosophies, including a lot of Asian students, right? And I'm very clear about this on the first day. Obviously, I'm not Asian. Please, enter the conversation, critique, share any information that you have, any perspectives that you have. Those of you who are from these traditions that we're talking about. But in particular, I have a lot of Chinese students, and some of them have come to my office and sat in that chair and looked at me with like shock on their face as they have come out of China from underneath this authoritarian regime to the United States, and they find out for the first time about Tiananmen Square. They find out about some of the things that the Chinese government has been doing that they didn't know were happening, right? Because their whole life has been filtered, right? They've not known the truth about their own government, about their own world, right? They come out of that, they look back at it, and they're in shock. And they're like, how do I deal with this? And what can I do about it? Can anything be done about it, right? And, I have to just kind of sit with them and be like, yeah, it's shocking, and there might not be anything you can do about it, right? And it's so comfortable here in America, where we believe that we have a trustworthy government, somewhat, right? Like, people don't really trust the government, but we believe that the government isn't capable or isn't willing to do something like a 70-year-long disinformation campaign, right? But now there's evidence that they have been. And what we are going through, those of us who are paying attention to that evidence, who are listening to David Grush, right? And others, right? Carl Nell, Christopher Mellon, Blue Elizondo, right? Like, all of these people who are coming out from these government contexts and saying, or military contexts, intelligence contexts, and saying, no, really, there's something going on here, right? All of us are going through the same thing that my Chinese students are coming from, right? And like, I don't know why people can't wrap their mind around the possibility that this is happening here, right? Like again, people who live in the United States, like, they have a tendency to think that those things happen over there in other places, right? They don't happen here. Yeah, they do. Go look at the Iran-Contra scandal, right? Like, yeah, the US government has done really dark stuff and hid it from the public and lied about it illegally and then gotten in trouble. This has happened before, right? It is not impossible that it's happening now. There is emerging evidence that it has happened since the 1940s, right? So, yeah, boy, this is a real problem, right? And I don't know. I think I'm bringing all of this back around to this, like, push for disclosure and transparency here in the United States, right? Like, if what David Grush is saying is even possibly the truth, then we have to get to the bottom of it. And this excuse that the government has been about national security reasons, we can't tell you what it is. We can't let you see the footage that was shot by one of our military pilots on their cell phone, not on a secure camera, not on a highly classified camera, on their cell phone, right? We can't let you see that for national security reasons. Like, man, that's not going to cut it anymore. Like, we need to know what's going on, because it is furthering all of this toxic division and distrust. And man, we need to get to the bottom of this.
One more question then, Stephen, before we move on to some listener questions to finish off, because you've been really good with your time, and I appreciate it's early morning for you as well. With the toxicity, let's forget the government's not going after Stephen Brown right now. The government's not coming after me. You know, we don't know that, maybe. But
to my knowledge, the government is not coming after me. Hi, the CIA. Please don't come after me.
Yeah. You just take their paycheck and move on.
So I'm sitting on so much wealth over here.
Yeah. But looking at all these comments, you're new to the field.
Yeah.
The study. You can just walk away.
Yeah.
Why don't you go, screw this? This isn't worth my time and head off.
Look, man, the world's in bad shape right now. The environment is in really bad shape. Go look at the spike in ocean temperature. It's very bad. We've known this for decades. We're not paying attention to it. We're not doing enough. We're approaching tipping points. Like, the scientists are freaking out. They have been for a long time, and no one's really listening to them, right? Or those who are listening are powerless to do anything about it. The people with the power to do things about it aren't doing anything substantial about it, right? There's some other stuff on the horizon. The AI revolution is on the horizon. And although I use ChatGPT every day, I love the thing. I am concerned about the lack of wisdom that we are seeing, the lack of forethought that we're seeing in what's going on. There's a very good chance that we're about to generate large amounts of unemployment, and we do not have the economic structures in place to support the number of people who might be about to lose their jobs, right? That's bad. The global political situation is very unstable right now, right? The wars that are going on in Ukraine, the wars that are going on in Israel and Palestine, right? Like there's a lot of stuff. The election here in the United States and around the world, right? There's this increasing push towards nationalisms and factionalization, right? Political polarization is at like all-time highs, right? Like it's a very, very bad, unstable situation. If there is any chance that getting to the bottom of this UFO mystery might introduce some constructive new elements, right? What if there's novel energy? What if there's novel transportation? What if there are beings who we could communicate with, who could help in some way? Then it's worth doing. That's one reason for me. It's kind of a Hail Mary pass, right? Like, I don't know, maybe there's nothing here, but if there is something here, then it's huge. Right. And that's one. The other is, if there is something here and it's going to be disclosed in the near future, right? If, as rumors indicate, there are more whistleblowers coming closer to the program, right? Let's say in the next, sometime this year, let's say we get a firsthand whistleblower coming out and saying, David Grush says, I talked to firsthand people, right? Let's get a person who comes out with serious credentials, who says, I worked in the program. I've been in the room with the craft, with the bodies, right? I can't show you photos because they're classified, but I've gotten clearance from DOPSR to tell you it's real. Let's say that comes next, right? Let's say down the road, we finally got clearance to show you a photo. What are they going to show you a photo of first? They're going to show you a photo of a craft, right? There's been this very intentional move on the part of the people in the political world to focus on talking about the craft, right? There are strange objects in our sky, and they move in unusual ways that we cannot explain, is the party line, right? And when I say party, I don't mean Republican or Democrat. That's actually Barack Obama saying that, right? And right, there's these objects, there's these objects, there's these objects. There's been all this talk about objects, right? And objects are comfortable because we can just be like, I don't know what the objects are. Let's go. Maybe it's a drone. Maybe it's a meteor. Maybe it's a black hole. Maybe it's gas, right? Objects, objects, objects. Objects acting intentionally. Okay, if objects are acting intentionally, then there's an agent. If the agent isn't us, and the agent isn't the Russians, and the agent isn't the Chinese, then the agent is alien in some important way, right? So I guarantee, I don't guarantee. Here's what I suggest. Here's what we're going to see over the next few years. So, firsthand whistleblower. I worked on craft and bodies, but I can't show you pictures. Then sometime after that, here's a picture of a craft. Then sometime after that, here's a picture of a body, right? And what's going to happen at each of those phases is more and more people are going to be like, is that really, can I trust that? Like everything they're doing to David Grush right now, right? Who is this guy? Like, can I trust him? Is he making all this shit up? Is he been deceived by people above him? That's going to keep happening, right? Mm-hmm. That'll happen with the first-hand person. It'll happen with the flying saucer. How do we know that this is real? How do we know this isn't a 3D construct? I mean, at this point, AI can generate so many things. Maybe that's an AI-generated flying saucer because the deep state is trying to convince us, right? That's going to happen, right? Here's a picture of a body. Man, how do we know that's real? How do we know that's not AI generated? Right, that's going to happen, right? So eventually, right? Eventually, the president gets up and says, "No, seriously, we have crafts and bodies." Okay, then maybe no more than half of the U.S. population will go, "Maybe there is," and then the other half will be like, "Who is this crazy president? You can't trust this person. That's just part of the deep state trying to lie to you because they're trying to get this. It's part of their right." Like that's going to happen. Eventually, there has to be a tipping point. Eventually, something big has to happen. Something that makes the population at large go through the paradigm shift. And when that happens, that's going to be really hard for us. Those of us who have gone through ontological shock, right? I've gone through it very recently. Like it's a difficult thing to do, to reevaluate as many things as you have to reevaluate when you start taking these things seriously. I think personally, this is coming. There is a tipping point sometime, historically speaking, soon. Sometime this year to sometime this decade, right? Within the decade, there is a tipping point coming, I suspect, where we all have to face the reality that we are not alone and that we haven't been alone for a long time. This is why this Nazca case is so important to me, right? Like there seems to be evidence that we have not been alone for a long time, even if, as I believe, the J types are physical constructs and the M types are physical modifications. That's my own personal view, right? Like if that's true, that's evidence of contact, right? And if there's been contact for thousands of years, that throws into question so many things. That's a big deal, right? And like we need to think about it. We need to start processing that. We need to start getting ready for what seems to me to be the truth. And this is why I can't run away, right? Like everybody, Jaime Mussain can scream at me. He didn't scream, but he raised his voice. Jaime Mussain can raise his voice at me and shake his finger at me on his podcast, right? Like the people in the comment section can accuse me of being whatever they want to accuse me of. If there is a truth here, it is important. And I want to get ready for it. And I want to help people get ready for it. I want to anticipate as many of the problems as we can and try to get ahead of them, because this will be the biggest crisis that we've ever gone through.
Very well put. I appreciate you laying out the timeline the way you did. I would add very similar to how I think things will play out, even on the timescale. I think that this decade, one thing I would add in to that public drip would be we'll get something from the James Webb Telescope that will say there is signs of life on a planet that's too far away. We can't get near it for 600 years.
Yep.
That'll be enough for the populace to go, well, if we think something's there, then maybe something is coming here. And I think that just opens and bridges a gap a little bit for folks.
That's good.
to accept something's here. If we go, look, there's something really, really far away, but we can't get to it, and surely it won't get to us. We'll find pollution. I think that opens up the conversation for folks going, wait a minute, then maybe things have came here.
Yeah.
Then you can enter in. So I would expect the James Webb to play a part in it.
So this has already This has already happened, right? I was looking up the number, K2-18b.
We keep finding planets with possible signs of the pollution on them, and this is what they need, like pollution on an industrial scale.
Well, so this is, I think, I thought the K2-18b thing is not pollution, but chemicals that are produced only by living things is that one. But yeah, look, so what I'm saying is, very good point. I agree with you, right? That so parallel to the kind of government disclosure thing, we have this scientific trajectory, right? Oh, we found that there's planets. Oh, we found that there's planets in the right zone. Oh, we found that there's planets that have these weird chemicals in them, right? Or maybe preliminary data that there's life on other planets. That's already been stated, right? K2-18b it's already been stated might contain life, right?
Yeah.
As we go further and further, I completely agree. We get more and more data indicating that it does contain life. I agree. That'll run parallel with what we talked about before. Yep, that's right.
Awesome. Listen, a couple of questions to finish off then. One from Dave Smethurst gives a little bit of context, some of which you've discussed, but then he adds on it. Dave asks, your recent presentation on the Good Trouble show suggested the little and middle-sized mummies were manufactured but the larger Maria-type body was a real human with a genuinely larger skull than modern humans. Do you see any connection to Maria and other similar elongated skulls found in Paracas, Malta, and other locations that seem not to be the product of artificial skull boarding? Were they an offshoot of humanity whose last remnant died out in South America?
Good. Great question. Okay. So clearly there's a relationship between the Paracas skulls and Maria and Montserrat and the other M types, because they're the same region, right? So like the same region, presumably some kind of cultural continuity between them, right? So let's consider both versions, the less exotic and the more exotic, right? So the less exotic is it's all skull binding. Even the ones that seem hard to account for skull binding, maybe it turns out we can account for them somehow. That's the less exotic version, right? The less exotic version is still weird, right? Like with David Grush stuff on the table, like we do still have to ask, why are there elongated skulls all over the world, right? Like that's a weird thing to happen, even if there's a prosaic explanation for how the skulls were elongated. The more exotic one, maybe skull binding can't account for it. That's a possibility, right? So this would be in my most recent video, I distinguished between different kinds of genetic modification, right? And one of them I just said was natural. So it is possible that this is just it's possible that there was a hominid species, or I don't know if it's species, whatever. There's a branch of hominids that just have longer skulls, right? Like we know the Neanderthal existed, we know the Denisovans existed, right? Like they had slightly different features from modern humans. Maybe this is some kind of naturally occurring evolutionary relative. Yep, that's a possibility. Maybe it's a intentional genetic alteration. That's a possibility. So all of those possibilities are on the table, and all of them are weird and interesting and worth investigating. I don't know. Was that a response to that question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I expanded on what you mentioned earlier. And interestingly, one of the questions, I'm going to jump to this one because you've slightly touched on it there. From Peter, he asks, as an initiate recently baptized into the UFO community, how much credence does he give the conjecture that we, Homo sapiens sapien, are hybrids of DNA from already evolving primates and other non-human intelligences? If this were true, would it make DNA analysis of the Nazca mummies harder to use as evidence of their non-human nature, since their DNA could largely be similar to ours?
So yeah, everything is possible. Not everything is possible. Is it possible? Let's just consider a hypothesis here, right? Let's consider that there are some kind of overseer beings. Let's just engineers who have been tweaking our ecosystem for a long time, right?
Yeah.
maybe even since the beginning, but let's just say over the course of the development of Homo sapiens, like let's just say that there was intentional oversight between, say, our non-human primate ancestors and Homo sapiens sapiens, right? Could we detect it? Well, I don't know how you could, right? So if it were done slowly enough, then it would be difficult to distinguish between that and ordinary evolutionary hypotheses. So like we have to remember that there are weird things on the table in evolution already, right? Like the Cambrian explosion is this big jump in complexity and diversity way back in the fossil record, right? One of the big popularizing evolutionary biologists, Stephen Jay Gould, right, was pointing at this hypothesis called punctuated equilibrium, right? It looks like evolution doesn't take a linear path. It looks like there are jumps, right? There's relatively substantial changes that happen pretty quickly, right? Now, maybe that can be accounted for using non-intentional natural selection kinds of processes. Maybe that's evidence of engineering of some kind, right? So yeah, this gets really hard to imagine because we only have a sample set of Earth's ecosystem, right? And if we take seriously the possibility that our ecosystem has been farmed, managed, engineered, tweaked, supervised in any capacity, we might not be able to tell because everything we know about life, we know about from life on Earth. And does that make sense? So I think it's a really good question. And it's like it might turn out that the reason that punctuated equilibrium happens, that we see these like stable evolutionary plateaus and then relatively quickly a lot of changes all at once. Maybe that's because of some non-intentional process. Or maybe it's because there are beings that have spaceships and they bounce to another planet, maybe traveling slower than light, but they're traveling close to the speed of light. So they're experiencing time dilation, right? So they go pretty fast. It takes them subjectively a year to get to one place. And they turn around, they do some stuff over there, and then they come back again. And when they get back here, it's 10,000 years later because of time dilation, right? Then they could make a tweak and bounce to another planet and make a tweak and bounce to another planet and make a tweak and bounce. Like, could we detect that? And would it be different from what we detect? I don't know.
I like the idea. And again, being newer to the topic, I don't know how much you've looked into this, but folks say that the abduction phenomenon can run through generations of families.
Yep.
Now, an argument against that would be, why would an alien species be so interested in Stephen Brown's family over 150 years? But if that alien species over half an hour could visit 5 generations of the same family, because for them, they experience time in a different way, then actually for them, your great-great-grandparents dying off, you being born and growing up, happens in the blink of an eye, and they can test the genetics over hundreds, thousands of years. And for them, it's just a day at work. Nothing.
This is a really good point, right? And it doesn't even require what I would consider time travel proper. I know we talked about time travel a bit last time, right? Like it doesn't require anything weird as far as modern physics goes, right? Like you could literally like tweak some stuff, get in your ship, fly in a circle, right? Tweak some stuff, fly in a circle. And like you said, you could skip generations depending on how long that circle is and how fast you're going. Subjectively speaking, from the experience of let's just call them the engineers, from the experience of the engineers, you could make a tweak, go to bed, nap on your ship, come back the next morning from your experience and see the great-grandchild of the being you just tweaked. Yep.
And you've just cured some genetic fault or fixed an illness, fixed a mistake.
Yep. Yeah. That's just 100% Einstein relativity, no faster than light. Like if you had the kind of technologies that these, what I like to call 6OCs, these UFOs, flying saucers, UAPs, if you have the kind of technology to pull off the kinds of maneuvers that those things are pulling off, then you do have that capacity, right? You could just do that really quick acceleration thing, fly in a circle, and then you would be here months, years, decades, centuries, millennia, as you could skip as much time as you want. Yes. I don't think you can go back in time, right? Because of the closed causal loop problem, but you can go forward in time at different rates.
Yeah. Superman done the backwards thing in Christopher Reeve Superman. Spoiler alert if anyone's not seen a 50-year-old movie. But yeah, he goes back in time and stops Lois Lane dying in a landslide, from what I remember. So
yeah, that's right. Right, and I just want to like call attention to the. I mean, I know most people who care about this stuff already know about this, but the Soul Foundation videos are really, really good, and in particular, Kevin Newth's video on the physics of UAP, I would highly recommend. As far as what kind of accelerations have been observed here and what that implies for the time travel, the time dilation, interstellar travel possibilities. And it follows directly from that you could do this like skipping time thing just by flying in loops.
And if anyone hasn't seen it, I'll take this opportunity to say I interviewed Kevin back in March, so folks can check that one out. Lovely guy, really nice.
Yeah, I've heard great things about him.
Yeah, really, really nice. 2 questions left for you then. So from Nikki. Nikki asks, I'd love to know what Stephen thinks as to whether non-human intelligence is extraterrestrial or interdimensional, and also how you interpret the term interdimensional.
Yeah, that's so the answer is my personal suspicion is it's all of the above, right? That's my personal suspicion. Sometimes we get into these again false dichotomies, right? It's either extraterrestrial, or it's extra dimensional, or it's spiritual, or it's consciousness, or it's right, like, or there might be all of the above, right?
Yeah.
Either it's the reptilians, or it's the Greys, or it's the skinwalkers, or it's all of the above, right? Or some of the above, right? Like it doesn't have to be all of the above either. But extraterrestrial is easy, right? That's just kind of ordinary biology and physics, right? Like, could life have emerged somewhere else? Could they have developed technology fast enough to get here? Time dilation stuff, right? That's all straightforward, right? Interdimensional is tricky, right? So again, modern physics already points in the direction of interdimensionality, right? Like string theory has way more dimensions in it than just our ordinary ones that we think of: 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, right? There's more hypothesized dimensions than that. Various interpretations of quantum mechanics require higher dimensions, other dimensions that you can track some of these interactions with. Like, how do we explain the apparent spooky action at a distance, with the entanglement stuff? One of the interpretations of that is that they're interacting across some other dimension, right, and not through ordinary space. So the word dimension is really ambiguous,
yeah.
Right? One way of thinking about it in this kind of instrumentalist kind of mode is science is just a bunch of equations, right? A dimension then is just another variable that you need to introduce into your equation in order to be able to track and predict all the things that you need to do, right? Like, that's all it means. It's like a mathematical feature of the structure that you're building. Like, you need another variable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to the data science people, right? Like, you've got various dimensions of data, and what that means is you just have various axes that you have to label on top of each other. If you can vary across this and this and this and this and this, then you have a n-dimensional data space, right? So if you're kind of being instrumentalist about science and you just think about it as like a bunch of equations that we're trying to use, then one way of reading dimensions is just there is some other factor that requires us to add another variable, another axis to the data system in order to track all of the features, right? Now, if we start getting realist about science and saying, then that means there is some other aspect of reality which corresponds with that variable. And what might that other aspect of reality be then we have to ask all kinds of weird questions. And it's not clear what they are. Are there other spatial dimensions that are layered on top of this one somehow, or other space times that are layered on top of this? That's a possibility. Is consciousness not accountable for, given our standard 4-dimensional view of the world? Maybe our experience of phenomenal subjectivity is actually because we are not 4-dimensional beings. We're 5-dimensional beings, or 6-dimensional beings, or 7-dimensional beings. And the way that you access, the way we interact with those other dimensions is through this experience that we call consciousness. That's a possibility, right? Maybe there are spiritual dimensions, right? Like I have consciousness because I have a soul. And what is a soul? It's a different type of thing, and it interacts in this other kind of way. And we could talk about that as a dimension, right? So what do I mean by dimension, or higher dimensions or other dimensions? Something beyond our ordinary concept of space-time, right? What could it be? All options are on the table. Pure spirit, consciousness, right? Brahman, a god, heaven and hell, the spiritual realm, the realm of the angels and the demons, the realm of the Anunnaki or the gods, or like, like at this point, so many weird options are on the table that it's hard to even imagine how to distinguish between the hypotheses, right? Like what is the difference exactly between talking about angels and demons, or talking about higher consciousness beings, or talking about interdimensional, higher dimensional beings? Like might those just be different vocabulary terms for the same reality, right? Like angel in the kind of Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition just means something like messenger. Demon means something like a spirit, although when people talk about demons, they assume evil. So like could you just translate all of those concepts into, right? Angel, demon, whatever, like, avatars of deities, right? Like, could you just translate all of that into higher dimensional talk? Maybe. This is why some people have picked on me when in my first video, I talk about angels and demons. I don't know what those are, right? And they were like, of course you know what angels and demons are. And I'm like, no, I don't. And nobody else does either, right? Like,
there's less proof of those than there are UFOs. So,
well, unless proof of UFOs just is proof of them, right? Like, that's assuming that there is, like, that's assuming that we have a clear-cut concept of what an angel and a demon is. Like, angel just means messenger, and demonic characters are just evil versions of those things, right? Like, that's what
those folks are making the point to you that angel being winged guy, long hair, halo above his head. Demon being Dave Grohl in the Tenacious D video, type figure.
Sure. Okay, but that's just cheating, right? Because because that image of what an angel is from the Renaissance, right?
That's Santa from the Coca-Cola adverts now.
Yeah.
Santa
I don't know enough.
Santa.
I shouldn't say that claim boldly because I don't remember enough about the specific art history of imagery about angels, right? But like those are the result of specific artistic choices made by painters and to represent characters described in literary stories, right? Scriptural stories. So, I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the memes going around about biblically accurate angels, right? That's what they look like. That's at least how they're described in the text, right? So, so we can't cheat and go like, well, we all have this image of an angel. No. We, the Europeans here, based on this art history that we have this image of an angel. Is that what they look like? I mean, maybe, or maybe entirely not. Go look at all the fun, biblically accurate angel memes, right? Like what's that thing? And is that interdimensional? And is that related to the UFO phenomenon? Is that related to these encounters that people are having? Probably.
Well, Stephen, I'm going to ask you for about 10 more minutes of your time.
Yeah.
I've got a couple
and
of
that'll
questions.
get us right to a 2-episode break, because then you can get a
Do you know what? I don't know yet, but what I'm thinking is I'm going to keep the questions for the people who pay for the podcast. One of the questions you asked me to ask you, and you probably forgot. If you remember, don't say what it is.
Okay, I don't.
Okay, so you asked me via message a month and a half ago to ask you this. You were annoyed at yourself. So
Yes.
Ask it again. So I'm going to ask it on the paid thing. Okay.
Yes.
So because you effed up on the last one and basically disappointed yourself.
I did.
And I've got another question to ask you as well from a listener. But for those who are listening on the free feeds, thank you very much. If you've listened this far, it's been almost 2 hours. Stephen's been wonderful with his time. I'm on my second interview back to back. Stephen made his way into work early just for all of you, and I left him hanging. So, Stephen, let me ask you one more thing then. To wrap up, how do you want people to interact with you? Because right now, you're not selling a book. You don't have lectures you want people to go and watch. You know, you've made a couple of presentations and you've got a YouTube channel with a humble audience, just over 1,000 subscribers now.
Yeah.
Well, how do you
watch out, Mr. Beast? I'm coming for you. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. How do you want folk to interact with you?
Wow, that's a kindly. I want folk to interact with me kindly.
So realistically,
I want them to assume the best of not only me but of other people. I'll get back to your actual question in a minute, but like, I just want to harp on this for a moment. I used to run this organization, which was conversations having to do with philosophy of religion, and we had a ground rule, which is when you ask questions, feel free to critique and object, but when you speak to somebody, speak as though you think they are smarter and morally more mature than you are, even if you know that's not true. Like, don't talk them down as though they were dumb or wicked, right? Like, talk to them as though you looked up to them intellectually, as though you looked up to them ethically, right? And if you just follow that rule, you'll do so much better in your interactions with everybody. Like, you'll treat them with kindness and respect. Anyway, that's other than that, like, sure, go watch my YouTube videos. Hopefully they're helpful in thinking about what's happening in Nazca and what's happening in DC. That's what I'm trying to do, is kind of get people thinking about this stuff. There's not really a straightforward way of interacting with me. You can send me an email. I am terrible at email. I have a lot of emails I need to respond to, most of which have been very kind. I actually haven't been attacked over email, at least not yet.
Have you got like a home address you want to share? Someone?
Yeah, no, yeah. So look, I went on the Matt Ford show, and somebody just doxed Matt Ford, right? Like, just calling attention back to why privacy really does matter here.
Yeah.
Like there's real world dangers for being a person out in front talking about these topics because this community is toxic. So anyways, yeah, I don't know. Watch those YouTube things. I don't have anything to sell. I don't have any merch. I'm just trying to help.
Well, folks, on that, I'm selling T-shirts with Steve's face on them for
$50. That sounds.
Okay.
Oh boy, you'll really sell out of those real fast. Everyone wants that.
Yeah. But listen, Steve, you hang around with me. Thank you very much, folks. It's been a pleasure talking to Steve again. I'm going to stay and ask him a few more questions. If you can support the pod or choose to, you'll get a little bit more content off the back of that as well. But you can't complain. This has been almost 2 hours now of Steve explaining things to me like I'm more intelligent than him, but he knows I'm not. So, Steve, thank you very much. That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify, just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he could expecting me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little more.